live.
We're live.
Good morning.
Good morning. We are alive. You're alive.
You're live.
I'm alive. Look at that.
We are live.
Well, welcome to Shrink Tank Live, the morning show here in the Shrink Tank. We're actually not in the Shrink Tank. We're in Charlotte, North Carolina. We're part of Southeast Psych. I'm Jonathan Hetterly, a licensed professional counselor. Good morning to my colleague. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Good morning, Jonathan. My name is Ian Murray. I'm also a licensed professional counselor. We are excited to be here this morning. So we're coming to you live each Friday morning, and we're talking about the latest stuff throughout the week from a unique perspective, more of a psychological perspective. And
Absolutely. Now, one of us can be Dr. Phil,
Yep.
and one of us can be Dr. Drew. So which one are we going to be today, right?
yes,
If that's what it means to be a doctor, I'm perfectly content being a master's level clinician, right?
that's right.
Well, there's a lot going on, but we really wanted to take this morning and talk about
Yeah.
three things in particular. We're
Yep.
going to talk about NFL superstar Antonio Brown.
Yep.
He's making the headlines again, not always for the right reasons. So I'm going to turn that over to you in a moment. You can kind of talk about some of the things you're observing.
Absolutely.
We're going to talk about Dave Chappelle and Andrew Yang. He just announced he's going to do 2 shows in support of his presidential campaign in our neck of the woods, just down in South Carolina.
Awesome.
And then we're going to kind of wrap it up talking a little bit about technology and teens, something that we often address a lot in our clinical work, and maybe just provide some tips for parents and teens and some of the things that we observe with our work. But before we do, if you're watching on YouTube Live, you now can support us. If you look at the icon, click to help support us. We do this on our free time. This is not a part of our professional work.
Yep.
You can help continue to support us as we try to create all types of content that explores the intersection of psychology and pop culture. Also, please engage with us. You can post questions or comments, and we'll be happy to engage with our audience. Thank you guys for taking your time out to watch this. But let's shift now and talk about Antonio Brown,
Yes.
who, for the longest time, up until this year, Antonio Brown, Pittsburgh Steeler,
Yep.
the best wide receiver in the game today.
Always.
Well, it would be hard to say Antonio Brown of which team after this past year, because he really put new meaning to the term free agent or on the market. But again, he's made a lot of headlines recently, and I know that's something that you actually wrote about for Shrink Tank, our website. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you were chronicling in your article?
Yeah, so, as Jonathan had alluded to, Antonio Brown has been viewed as, rightfully so, one of the premier receivers and athletes that we have really ever seen. I mean, the things that he's done in the NFL have been uniquely consistent and excellent. But what's happened really since his trade from Pittsburgh to Oakland has almost been an unraveling. And we really don't have a precedence for this for someone who's in their prime, who is actively trying to be a part of the league, behaving in the way that he is. So, earlier this week, if you haven't seen it, there was a video that Antonio Brown posted himself on Instagram Live. It's a rather really disturbing and distressing video of him confronting police. One of his child's mother, and he depicts this scenario in which he is a victim. However, in this video that he is just willfully videotaping and streaming for people to see, he's cursing, he's being belligerent, can't understand what he's saying some of the time. People are trying to talk with him, and he's just yelling. And his kids are there, and it's really amazing to watch, and it's really sad. So my inspiration for the article was really this last incident of, okay, let's take a look at the bigger picture. As these things come out, a lot of the national narrative, from what I've noticed, seems to be this weird dissonance between laughing at what's going on and then being like, oh, wait, this guy is actually really struggling, and should we be concerned about him? And so the answer is absolutely. There is no doubt in my mind that there's something deeper going on.
Okay.
So, even we had talked before the show, his agent, who's one of the most renowned agents in the NFL, cut ties with him yesterday. And what he said was, I would love to work with Antonio Brown after he gets some help.
Okay. So even people that he has relationships with, even people that greatly care about him, or even having a self-interest in his overall well-being and professional pursuits, they're speaking out saying, in some level, there's concern about Antonio Brown.
Absolutely.
And, one thing we want to make clear is, as mental health professionals, we don't diagnose people from afar. That would be unethical, and it would really be out of line.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons that Shrink Tank exists is that we want to engage culture and what's going on through the lens of psychology and mental health to help inform and educate or frame a conversation about things that are going on. So, obviously, without really going a diagnostic route, what are some of the specific behaviors or patterns about Antonio Brown that, as a mental health professional, really stand out to you that really greatly concerns you?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that you alluded to that's really important is that we're not diagnosing, but we can take a unique lens and vision into what's going on. So I have this conversation with parents a lot, right? Kids engage in certain behaviors for a reason. And if we look at them as them being defiant or difficult, we can miss some of the greater picture. And so I think with Antonio Brown, this is really important, is that he's struggling with something. Like, he's having a really difficult time. Does that condone the behaviors that, the things that are going on? Absolutely not. So one of the things that's really been fascinating to watch is his ability to deflect blame or responsibility for his actions.
Yeah.
And that's really common when we have a lack of awareness or when we are trying to protect ourselves. It's often a defense mechanism, right? It's easier for me to say, well, the police are coming after me, or someone's trying to take something from me, than it is to own up to my behaviors. So that's a really important piece of it. It's the NFL's fault. It's the Patriots' fault why he got cut. It's the Raiders' fault. It's not, what is my role in this? Yep. Some of the other things that really stand out is the persistence and the consistency of his behaviors, right? Okay. So when people come in and they talk to us about their symptoms, one of the questions I ask is, how long has this been going on? I'm sad for a day or two. Okay, that's a normal change of human emotion and circumstances. But this has been going on for the better part of 6 months now.
Yeah, it's not isolated.
It's not isolated. And it continues to happen. And it continues to get negative reaction. And so the other thing that's been fascinating is almost his need for any attention. Right? Good. So even negative attention is still attention. So, I talked about this in the article, is he's very used to growing up being at the center of attention for his athletic ability.
Yes.
Right? Everybody loves him. His kind of slogan is business is booming. Right? And that's his reference to how good things are going, how well he's playing, how he's doing for himself. And when we take a look at this kid growing up in this spotlight, and all of a sudden that spotlight is gone. The one thing that you knew that you were very good at, that people praised you for and outwardly, is gone. So now, if I'm used to that, how do I figure out how to get attention in the same way? And even if it's not positive, he seems to thrive on any attention.
He needs that external stimulation and reinforcement.
Absolutely.
Earlier in the year, when we were playing fantasy football, we were part of that, right?
Yeah.
And our cameraman, our producer, Brandon Gage, who did horribly. I think he was maybe second to last. But anyhow, we would talk a lot about Antonio Brown because he was so smart in drafting Antonio Brown into his fantasy football team. And his perspective at the time was, this is all an act. It's calculated. Yeah. And it very well may have been. Yeah. But Brandon, if you recall, even at that time, I started to theorize that there may be some underlying mental health struggles here. And we just kind of had to wait and see what was truly going on. And it may not be an either or. It may be both. It really may be that there was a calculation on his part to get to a team that he wanted to. Yep. But his own self-destructive behavior and his inability to change really thwarted whatever kind of master plan that he had. It's interesting when you think about Antonio Brown, who was not well-regarded in college. So he didn't go to a prestigious college football. He wasn't drafted very high. he seems like a guy that would need a chip on his shoulder to
Yeah.
kind of motivate him. And you think about people like Tom Brady or even Aaron Rodgers that take those slights
Yeah.
and they channel it into productivity and making themselves better.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, Antonio Brown may be one of those guys that had a chip on his shoulder, right, to motivate him, but also did in some ways create this very self-contained, rigid perspective where everybody's against me, right? You talked about blaming others, and in counseling psychology, we call that an external locus of control, where we have this unwillingness or inability to look at how we participate into our own life. And that's really textbook Antonio Brown.
Absolutely.
And now that doesn't mean that somebody has an external locus of control, that they have a mental illness, but it certainly can highlight somebody that's struggling how to manage a healthy and kind of consistent sort of life or mindset. It's definitely clear that his mindset is not a healthy or sensible mindset for an adult professional that has been successful in a lot of ways.
Right. And I think that's one of the difficult things to watch is he's been successful, but it's hard to watch somebody engage in behaviors, actions that we can all see are destructive.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my gosh, we want to help you, but we can't force you to get help. And I think that's where a lot of this frustration and narrative has come from. You know, when it first came out that, you know, he was in a cryogenic chamber and burnt his foot, you know, it's a terrible image. So I'm gonna look it up. But my first thought was, oh, the media's just making a big deal out of this, right? Like, there's just, you know, it's Antonio Brown, it's the Raiders, it's HBO Hard Knocks, like, you know, this is gonna go away. But what I've started to realize is this is self-inflicted.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't TMZ showing up at his house and being like, why are you yelling at the police? He is, like, voluntarily giving us an inside look into what's going on. And I think this continues to be the concern, is the lack of insight.
Sure.
So I think it's a really important topic that as these things come up, we continue to talk about them, but we also respect that distance. I don't know Antonio Brown. I've never met him. I have no idea of what's going on internally. But
Call us, Antonio.
that's right. We'd love to talk to you. But I do think it's important that we talk about some of these things and bring a different lens than is often portrayed.
Sure. Yeah. Because it'd be really easy, and I fall into this camp at times, is that in some ways when people are acting very erratic online, social media, out in the public's eyes, it's easy to mock them. It's a very cheap and convenient punchline.
Yeah.
But what happens when we start to shift and say, well, maybe this isn't funny, maybe somebody in the public eye is melting down and really losing their capability to live a healthy life. And so I think that's definitely something to be mindful of.
Yeah.
And I wish this would be the last time we ever hear about or talk about Antonio Brown, but unfortunately I suspect that's not going to be.
That's right.
That's not going to be the case.
That's right. And so, you know, I hope when we do that, it's that turning the page, that next chapter of, you know, we can sit back and say, hey, this is what he's doing, right? This is what he started to realize. So I know that can be kind of heavy at times and a lot to take in, but I think it's really important to talk about. But I want to take a little transition.
We're going to pivot, right?
Yeah, we're going to try and segue into a unique opportunity that Jonathan has.
Yes.
And so I would love to hear more about it. I know, and I hope our audience knows, what a pop culture fanatic you are.
I am a pop culture junkie.
That's
That
right.
is my drug of choice. Absolutely. And this is really cool because I woke up this morning, and Brandon knows this. Sometimes I wake up very early. He will get work emails from me at like 4:30 or 5 in the morning.
Was early.
And so I'm just scouring the internet, as our boomers like to say, and I come across an announcement that David Chappelle, not only had he publicly endorsed Andrew Yang for president, but he announced that he was going to be doing 2 shows with Andrew Yang in our own backyard in South Carolina here at the end of the month in support of his presidential campaign. And let's face it, for the last few years, nothing has gone together with the presidency more than comedy, right? Comedy and American politics. So what better way, what more effective way than to marry David Chappelle and Andrew Yang? And so this resonates with me on a lot of levels. By the way, I immediately got tickets so that I can go down and see this, because I have a history of going to presidential rallies, and we'll talk about that in a second. But David Chappelle is somebody that I think is one of the most insightful and smart comedians ever.
Yeah.
In fact, sometimes when he talks about just thought-provoking issues about America and race and our history, sometimes his serious commentary I find more mind-blowing than his comedy, because the man is very intelligent, and he's able to communicate and articulate very complex and gray areas of American culture and our racial history. And recently he won the Mark Twain Award for his influence on American culture, and he gave a brilliant acceptance speech where in a lot of ways he talked about our American landscape right now and how we're so serious, we're so uptight, that I think he used the phrase, we need to let the air out of the room. And in some ways he talked about how stand-up comedy, specifically that genre, is the perfect platform for Americans, because you will, no matter what your demographic is in American culture, race, ethnicity, socioeconomic, religious beliefs, political beliefs, there is a comedian out there that is using that platform to talk about that demographic. Yeah. He also talked about comedy is a platform where we can talk about anything, and that discomfort and offense is not automatically a bad thing, that it really can challenge us to explore where that discomfort comes from, and how humor in a lot of ways is designed to provoke us. It's designed to awaken us from our kind of just mindless slumber that a lot of times we engage culture and history. And so the idea of being able to see Dave Chappelle live, to me, is just as much an academic as it is a comedy opportunity. And then Andrew Yang, an Asian American that's running for president, to me is a really interesting thing to follow. And for those of you that aren't aware, I am Asian. I am Asian American, so I know my last name Hetterly doesn't indicate that. But as somebody that is adopted, that really kind of has a very complicated or blurred sense of cultural identity, the idea of an Asian American running for president and not being viewed as a punchline or somebody that's just in it for their own self-promotion and then is just going to quickly kind of fade away. He has really brought up a lot of interesting topics and conversation points about not just American politics, but even how to run a campaign and how to make it personal, how to speak to people and connect with them rather than just lay out these bullet points of policy and things along those lines.
Well, it sounds like you have no interest or like thoughts on it at all. So
no, I don't know. I may watch some YouTube clips instead, right?
Yeah, I think that might be in just passing.
Absolutely.
But it sounds like it's really interesting to hear you talk about it, and this blend of kind of like this intelligence, this new like fresh take on politics, and then we've got this Dave Chappelle who, as you said, is amazingly brilliant. When I think of Dave Chappelle, I think of Chappelle's Show. And
How
so
could you not?
Right. But it's so fascinating to see like this guy who throughout his life has gone from Chappelle's Show, which as funny and quirky as it was brilliant.
Yep.
And it's amazing to see his transformation into this guy who is doing these, funny like short skits to a guy who is now talking about these big cultural things in a way that's not just comedic, right? It's not just for laughs. It's something that's much more serious and engaging, and I think it's amazing to watch his transformation, and what a unique opportunity for these two to be able to come together.
Yeah, as a father, as I get older, I've just recognized my role in being more politically kind of aware and to really participate in the process. And I mean, let's rewind 4 or 5 years ago. Which I've always felt that voting is my civic responsibility. It's also a privilege that a lot of people around the world do not have. So, but in a lot of ways, I had a very caustic view of like how much my vote really mattered, and I had maybe a very bleak sense of like, well, this is more of a joke than it really has real life implications.
Sure.
So let's say 4 years ago, let's say
Yeah.
hypothetically,
Yeah.
hypothetically 4
Hypothetically.
years ago, I thought it'd be funny to go to a Donald Trump rally.
Oh, yes.
And so I decked out on all this Asian for Trump stuff that I created, and I really was going down there to both mock it, but also see could I pull it off.
Yeah.
At the time, I never envisioned Donald Trump winning the U.S. presidency, so certainly I went into it as a joke. But the last several years, regardless of where you stand on the political landscape, we are seeing how politics and the people in power greatly matters. And we're seeing even outside of the political spectrum, young people are becoming more politically savvy. They're advocating for issues that matter to them. And so I think you're seeing that with people like Dave Chappelle and other celebrities, that the world is becoming more engaged, that we can't just simply be idle from the political platform, and if we can make a difference, that we need to do so. And it's not just on election day going up and voting. It's really using whatever platform people have to kind of champion issues that matter to them. I think the other thing that Dave Chappelle does really well, and he did this very well in his acceptance speech for the Mark Twain Award that he just received, is Dave Chappelle can speak to anybody. He's really not about making enemies. He recognizes, like he says in his acceptance speech, I can listen to a stand-up comedian say racist things, and he says, and I can tell that, damn, he means those things. But he can appreciate the person, he can appreciate the art form, because he recognizes at the end of the day, everybody wants to be heard. People have things to say. People notice things and they want to be heard, and he can appreciate that even if he and that other person have drastically different viewpoints and beliefs. That is something we have lost here in our modern times, is the ability to listen to other people. We see that all the time in our clinical settings, right? Is that trying to help families, parents, and teens. I do couples counseling. I do family work. It is difficult to listen to someone that sees the world in a different way that you do, but there's something inherently about our humanity, that ability to listen and accept somebody else where they're at. And so I'm excited to see not just this show with Dave Chappelle and Andrew Yang, but I'm excited to see, I'm cautiously optimistic here as we kick off election 2020 here on Shrink Tank Live, what this political process is going to be like, what awaits us in the next several months leading up to November.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's going to be fascinating to watch, and I'm sure you'll do a wonderful job in documenting and giving us some of that inside, like, just perspective of what's going on, and it's going to be an interesting pairing between those two and just the whole experience, because is it going to be over multiple days, or is it?
They're doing two shows. They're doing Wednesday, January 29th in Columbia, South Carolina. That's the one that I'm going to be going to. And then Thursday, they're going to be appearing in Charleston, South Carolina. Now, here's something interesting that it isn't fully fleshed out yet, but for our audience, it's something to stay tuned and stay connected with Shrink Tank is, so I got tickets for myself, but I also purchased some extra tickets that we might be doing some type of contest or giveaway for people that in the area. There's certain rules and restrictions, obviously, that would be interested in seeing Dave Chappelle and Andrew Yang live here at the end of January in South Carolina. So for those of you that have interest in either or both of them, stay tuned. We're going to be rolling out some type of giveaway or contest. And obviously, we want to take this moment to say that Shrink Tank is not a platform where we have any specific affiliation or endorsement of any political party or candidate, that any endorsements individually is the expressed opinions of that sole person, and it does not apply to Shrink Tank overall. If you or your loved one are affected by erectile dysfunction, that there are cures, there are ways to help, so seek out help. There are cures, your life can be better. Right?
That's right.
Politics, affiliation, erectile dysfunction. I think we've covered all of our...
You've got it. You've checked the boxes.
All of our liability has been covered.
check. Well, good. Well, you had talked about Dave Chappelle and this idea that we don't know how to, like, that we've lost this ability to just listen. Right? And so no place better epitomizes that than the internet and social media, right? So
what are you talking about, Ian?
Maybe that's just my experience.
Sure.
But You had mentioned, I think this might be a good opportunity for us to talk about, okay, this idea of our inability to listen or pay attention to others' opinions, or even like being able to consider looking at something from another person's perspective. Like you had mentioned in the beginning, we deal with technology, the internet, social media on almost a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. And in fact, you and I here at the end of the month I think we're scheduled to speak at a local school about technology specifically. And it really is one of the 2 or 3 most requested topics that schools and our community is requesting just education and help around. And the reality is that no one in our American society is unaffected by technology. It really has become the fabric and the center of our lives. So even for people that demonstrate difficulty with appropriate use or balanced lives, you can't get away from technology unless you're Amish. No. Didn't mean to call out our Amish. I can't even say Amish. I'm trying to say even our Amish fans out there that are reading this from Western Union telegrams. But no, this idea of technology, and it's not just about overuse. It's the correlation of stress and mental health implications, because we know America is a stressed out nation.
No doubt.
And we now know that technology also is stressing out Americans on any number of ways, whether it be their own use and that just discrepancy of their values and how they want to live their lives versus how they're conducting it on a day-to-day basis, or it's stressing people out because of what they view with their loved ones. As a parent, they see their kids' lives centered around technology, and it freaks them out. Absolutely. And they don't know what to do because their parents didn't have to deal with this. They can't really just sort of take their own experiences and say, well, this is how you effectively parent technology for today's generation.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating is that like the younger generations, the millennials, Gen Z, like this is what they're growing up with, right? This is what they're used to. And some of us who've been around a bit longer, we're learning how to use technology as it continues to grow and increase. And I think that's really the difficult piece is what you're talking about. We have no reference.
Sure.
Right? We have no like, oh, look, here's the manual for what we do. Right? So we're developing it as we go. And I think that's part of the biggest issue. And a lot of what I find and what I hear is what do we do about it? What are the answers? What are the solutions? And one of the things that's difficult about it is like there's no one right answer, right?
Sure.
Even the data on the correlation between whether it's video games, social media, technology on mental health is mixed, and there's correlations and there's different causes and there's different factors that go into this larger context of why we're stressed out, right? Sure. It's not just that social media was developed, now all of a sudden we're stressed out, right?
Yeah.
But that's an easy connection to make, right? I want to know why my kid or my loved one is more stressed out. And here's this new thing that we don't totally understand. And it seems to be around them a lot. So it's an easy correlation for us to make.
Yeah.
But I think it's important for us to have these dialogues of, okay, let's look at the broader picture and some of the nuances within technology and how we use it and consume it.
Yeah, and you have time because you have a newborn child, whereas I have 2 teen daughters, which in a lot of ways is really where a lot of the worry and panic is around the impact of mental health, specifically on teenage girls. And we are learning as we go, and we're making this up as we go. I mean, early on, the American Academy of Pediatrics, they recommended up until age 2, a child have 0 screen time. And all you got to do is look around you at an intersection in minivans, or go to a restaurant and look around, and we know nobody is following that. Person. And then even after age 2, up till age 18, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommended up to 2 hours of quality content. What is quality content, right? And so, nobody's following these rules or guidelines, but even the American Pediatric, they're trying to give a good rule of thumb. And what we're realizing is technology is here to stay. So it's really about how do you integrate it in your life without losing balance. And there's just a lot of things that people can do. a couple tips that we practice in my household. Well, first of all, we got around the whole like movies in minivans, that we convinced our children early on that the DVD player only worked on the interstate. So it was only when your car was going to be going on a trip at least 2 hours.
Yes.
And we had got them to believe that. So when we drove around town, they would have books and other stuff because the DVD
doesn't
player,
work.
it doesn't work if you're driving around town.
Man.
But the other thing that we did is we make technology a privilege. It's not a right, because American society, the human race has survived without technology, without a smartphone for thousands and thousands of
Believe it or
years.
not, yeah.
And so we made it a privilege to the point where they invest money into it. So our daughters have to pay for their phones. They have to contribute to their monthly fees.
Yeah.
And even though they pay for it, and here's something that a lot of parents, I think, struggle with, is even though they pay for it, they don't have exclusive rights to how it's used.
Right.
You know, we are still their parents, and our role is to really guide them with things that are theirs. And we do it in a way that is sensible. Because I think one of the things that our culture, when it gets itself really worked up and worried and fearful, is we start to decrease our common sense.
Yep.
Common sense in terms of boundaries, limits, common sense in terms of turning it in, protect your sleep, common sense of don't look at your phone when you're behind the wheel. Like, these are things that the APA has issued recommendations.
Yeah.
When we have to recommend common sense guidelines, that's not really anything that's being said about the APA. That's about the American culture that needs to be told common sense things. You know, technology in your room is going to disrupt your sleep.
Yep.
Wow. I will send you the bill for that. You know, great insight
that nugget.
for that.
Yeah.
So, you know, a lot of times when we're talking with people, it's really about calming down.
Yeah.
Using your logic, seeing the big picture. You don't want to weaponize technology. The
Right.
more you focus and make it the biggest deal, you weaponize it, you make it a bigger issue, and that's going to really bite people in the long run, because if technology is here to stay, we've already made it this very divisive.
Yep.
We've made it this weapon where it's either incentives or consequences versus, like, how do you make it an everyday part of your life?
Yeah. And I think that is one of the ways that, you know, I approach that is, how do we have, you know, as you said, I've got a very young daughter. So as she grows up, I'm starting to think, okay, how are we going to approach this, right? What steps are we going to take? And one of the things that I know I've talked with you about, and I talk with parents about, is how do we create a relationship with our child and their devices and technology, right? So it's not that I give a phone and say, hey, go play this game and I'm not going to be around, or you're going to go in your room. It's much like cars, right? We don't hand your teenage daughters the cars and say the keys and say, all right, let me know when you get to your friend's house, right? They've got to go through tests. They've got to go through driving school, right? They've got to do permits. Like, they have all of these steps that are with guidance and direction to get them to a place where they can use cars more responsibly, right? And they still make mistakes. I crashed my car 3 times, like right after I got my license, right? And
How did you get 3 cars? How did this not stop at 2?
Oh, it was the same car. It was just very resilient.
Okay,
car.
so you grew up riding bumper cars too much, and you
That's
were
right.
just like...
That's right. Just put some duct tape on it and keep it moving.
Nice.
But I think we lose that with technology. Is so easy and so accessible that it's like, all right, you can just take it and you've got this game and, you know, go play. I've got stuff to do. And I understand that. Like, we all have stuff to do, but it's important that we set the stage of, okay, here's how we want to approach technology with you and in partnership, which helps get, not make it as demonized, right?
Sure.
And I think that's a really important piece, is when we have influence and we have conversations and discussion, it can help further that process as kids get older.
And I think your pathetic anecdote of crashing a car 3 times, it says a lot about you, but it's a great point for parents to hear, which is part of maturing and growing up is having the opportunity to make mistakes and to fail.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when parents over control, when parents have a one strike and you're out.
Yep.
They rob children of the ability to learn from their mistakes and course correct. You and I and everybody in this world has learned an awful lot through resiliency, adversity, and bouncing back and figuring things out because of consequences and poor choices. When parents try to over control so that kids cannot misuse or overuse technology, they're limiting the ceiling of their kids' ability to manage and have a healthy relationship with their technology, because it's, you can only do it this way, you can only do it that right way. We just look at any other area of our life. If we operate in that way, you get super stressed people that really then they don't learn how to make this just an everyday part of their life in the same way as driving. It doesn't mean we endorse thoughtlessness, but thoughtfulness and maturity comes with the ability to make good choices. And you don't know if somebody's going to make a good choice unless you give them the opportunity to also make a bad choice. So you're looking at living, breathing bad choices right here.
That's right, as you can tell.
So, Brandon, do we have any questions or anything from our audience that or anyone watching out there? Hello?
We got one question for Ian. From a weird person named Mariel Butler asking, where'd you get your pizza socks?
Where my pizza socks?
Where'd you get
This
it
is
from?
a gift from my wonderful wife, Courtney.
There you go. So get married, you'll get pizza socks.
That's right. They're the best socks. So
now I'm hungry that we point out pizza. I think I'm gonna have pizza for lunch here. Well, we're gonna wrap up, but thank you guys for watching. Be sure to subscribe. Also check out our other platform, Psych Bites, which is our platform for practical psychology, enhancing lives, breaking the stigma. You can also check out Ian's article on Antonio Brown on the Shrink Tank website itself. Thank you for watching. We appreciate your guys' engagement. For Ian Murray, I'm Jonathan Hetterly. We will see you next time.